girls want food. I got a right hand switch. I'ma put you in my cauldron, bitch. Like you're not on these torches, inquisitioner, inquisitive, list on my tongue. Like you're not on.
Welcome to our noir universe. I will be your guide through the afterworld of gross excess and manifest destiny.
Dreamlike silhouettes dictate this reality that is as absent and absolute as water, whose condensation into dew is superfluitous. Our capricious characters are caught in between stakes, forks in the road that cut deathly any prior delineated morality that may or may not have been fixated into their psyche.
Because I'm a human being.
Panorama of American film noir elicits noir as an artistic style or a sociological phenomenon, one whose adventure's final stakes is death. Sordid or strange, death always emerges at the end of a torturous journey. But what kind of death? According to Bourdet and Chamiton, examples of American film noir were shaped by a new realism about violence, a rise in the American crime rate, and the widespread institution and popularization of psychoanalysis after the Second World War.
It costs so much money that I can't change this condition.
We will descend into the noir underworld through our reflections on the fatal femme fetish.
To do so, we must discuss the ideology of womanhood as described by Angela Davis in her 1981 publication, Woman, Race, and Class. Women, specifically those of us in the black and brown sector, are the promedian of capital proliferation, the workforce of labor, birth, the commodity fetish that is a feminized production and thus replicated by means of the appeased patrilineal male libido. The bondage of capitalistic punitivity is a forced fetishization and thus a forced labor into the binaries of gender. As seen through noir in black and white, we are demonstrated with our allegorical audience the psychoanalytic purpose of domination as a subversion to the subject who is a limitless vassal of consciousness. Our preliminary screen life is a premeditated average murder-making whose narrative plot lines infiltrate everyday assumptions that are regulatory codes through interpolations of operations, thinking, and style.
Hello again, children. I'm here to diagnose you, electron nymphettes, perturbed, penis-envying. It's time for us to discuss the dreaded and perverse pleasures of patriarch, founder, and father of psychoanalysis, Mr. Sigmund Freud. Let's take a dive in his deeply disturbing and perverse thoughts on pedophilia.
Thou shalt not be aware. Society's Betrayal of the Child by Alice Miller and Lloyd DeMause reads as follows. Freud and most psychoanalysts were little different from others in blaming children for their own abuse. Freud once called a girl patient hysterical who was molested by her father. The father was a friend of Freud's because she complained about her molestation. It was the child's sensuous nature that was to blame for sexual assaults by adults, because the sexual constitution, which is peculiar to children, is
precisely calculated to provoke sexual experiences of a particular kind. Freud's associates also believed the molestation of his child patients was desired by the child unconsciously.
In Barbara Hill's The Femme Fatale in film noir, criminality and sexuality are connected to the woman as, quote, enigma that must be solved. Film noir is thus a detour or a bending of the hermeneutic code from the questions connected with a crime to the difficulty posed by women as enigma or crime. The solution to the noir mystery hinges on deciphering women's inner nature. We cannot understand what Mary Ann Doan meant by this inner nature without identifying the femme fatale construct as a fetishization of femininity created to hold collective unwellness.
Let us repress the urge to kick Freud in his Oedipus for just one moment, while we reflect on the oceanic.
The fetus floats, kicks, sighs, cries, and even does somersaults in its fluid environment. Freud imagined this prenatal sensation of union with the mother as the infant's oceanic feeling. The seemingly innocuousness of the oceanic identification with the universe as a whole is in reality an appropriation of conquest, the fruit of fetishization, and the fertile grounds of subjugation for the intersection of white assimilationism and patrilineal identity to be nourished as a pathogen of ego within the capitalist samsara wheel of fate.
Yes, children, I bid you are wondering, what in God's green pasture could Dr. Louveau be talking of? Capitalist samsara wheel of fate? What type of psychoactives are you on? Well, it's time for us to meet Kama, the god of love, and Kali, the goddess of time.
Search for the romantic beloved is a spiritual search, an attempt to return not merely to the oceanic feeling, but to conscious, ecstatic union with the divine. This process takes place via the projection of the self onto the idealized other, who becomes soulmate, hero, goddess, savior. As a result, the imago amor appears to reside in the beloved, and the lover yearns for a union with them.
Yes, jolly good then. Well, how do we reach this ecstatic union with divinity, anyhow? Well, first we must discuss shadow projection and the metropolis of accumulation, which facilitates our capitalist excess in the US of A.
Let us dive into the subconscious waters of shadow projection through the racial imaginary. When we exit the womb, we become physically separated from the ambiotic oceanic placenta that nourished and provided for us all we needed to grow. In this loss, we may gain a sense of individuality, known as an ego. Within this adaptation, we form an identity to protect that ego. In this process, more often than not, a being called shadow emerges. This being holds all that we are, yet do not positively identify and align with in our self-image curated by the ego. In a racialized, capitalistic society, our shadow becomes projected into the vast arrangement of commodity fetishes available at our assistance in an ascertainment of the fractured ego's need to feel loved. This love that once came directly from the womb is now elusive, sometimes evasive, absent, or even abusive. And we come to recognize these feelings as our reality, all the while holding notions of ourselves that may or may not match up with that lived experience.
The incongruity of the shadow ego is rationalized and reprimanded by the projections of the majority onto the non-self, i.e. the racial imaginary. Racial imaginary produces items, things, objects, and fetishes rather than real relationships, connections, and unifications between people, beings, and existences that expand beyond the conscious limits of the self-subjugated ego complex. Hey, stereo beats, I feel everything. Bitch, you a seller, you a seller, and I'm reckless. Hanging on your shit, cause I had bang, dang. Dead as a doorstop, post colonial warlord. Anti-matter gin and the drunker can't get enough. Yeshua with my disciple. Hey, my name Wahoo, just like that Damon. I've been slain, doing that it's saving for us. Cheesy people who burn out the steeple, huh? Matter of a love, yeah. Can for cage dealers, keeper of the souls in the sewage. Fair suited trade dealer with all that evil on the maker of the crucifix. She ate an apple of eggs at the ass at the junction with the running up checks in the Venice Beach system with the drop draws. Hong Kong got involved me. I'm the next nuisance. I'm through with my hoop head twisted as an owl's nest. I can see it in the dark. I can see a babe retrograde with the chest and the scale set. Recluse with alligator death done. Turn you from a decrepit heart. Feels a narcissist flower. Leave me far from the craps of the empire. In my robe with the Dalai Lama. Swallowed by all the saga. Saga of the soggy tears burning in the earth sword. Absorbed with the fire quench thirst door. The magma to my dawn. I wanna holla at me. Holla at me and you gonna see. Contemporary artist and filmmaker Kara Walker's work has been ascribed as film noir in a 2007 Artforum article. Kara Walker's installations are said to literalize the metaphor of projection. The stratus of caricature that Kara Walker works in calls back to the allegory of Plato's cave. In a dark cave, there are prisoners, lined up and unable to move from their respective positions. They face a wall on which they constantly see shadows flickering. There is a fire behind the prisoners, and the light from the source casts the prisoners' shadows on the wall in front of them. In Femme Fatale, Negotiations of Tragic Desire, Elizabeth Bronfen identifies the femme fatale as the object of a binary self and other subjective complex. The femme becomes a symbol for the limits of cognition projected onto her from beneath the inhibited senses of a most likely male subject. The femme then becomes a figure whose function is to sustain the male subject's illusion of self-empowerment. This process of misidentification results in a dissociation wherein the femme, made by the male subjective, becomes innately fractured and grotesque within his fragmented psyche. In this sense, film noir and the male protagonist, as well as the femme fatale, are all constructions of the male ego and represent the American consciousness in regards to the paternalistic dreaming of the American utopic ideal. Let's look back to Fritz Lang's Metropolis as told through Andreas Huyssen's The Vamp and the Machine, Technology and Sexuality in Fritz Lang's Metropolis. The film suggests a simple and deeply problematic homology between woman and technology, a homology which results from male projections. Just as man invents and constructs technological artifacts which are to serve him and fulfill his desires, so woman, as she has been socially invented and constructed by man, is expected to reflect man's needs and to serve her master. Let's talk about the reflections of Metropolis in the context of American history as it pertains to colonialism in the phantasmagoric, imperial, patrilineal libido. We might say that film noir belongs to an American Gothic tradition that reflects the unresolved tension between both our Enlightenment heritage and that Calvinistic sense of innate depravity and original sin, from whose visitations, in one shape or another, as Herman Melville said famously of Nathaniel Hawthorne's tales, no deeply thinking mind is always and wholly free. Melville's remarks combine both a Puritan legacy and a legacy inherited from the Age of Reason. The thinking mind is the mind that banishes ghosts, embraces reason, and declares that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is possible in the best of all possible worlds. Yet the great appeal of Hawthorne's work is its great power of blackness, its theme that beneath the optimistic myths of the New Republic lies the terror of history that always threatens to erupt into the present. Or as Leslie Fielder said in his discussion of the American literary Gothic, a dream of innocence has sent Europeans across the ocean to build a new society, immune to the compounded evil of the past, from which no one in Europe could ever feel himself free. But the slaughter of Indians, who would not yield their lands to the carriers of utopia, and the abominations of the slave trade, in which the black man, woman, rum, and money were inextricably entwined in a knot of guilt, provided new evidence that evil did not remain with the world that had been left behind. In this sense, the noir part of film noir is the flip side of the utopian impulse within American history. Barbara Hill's concept of the double as the femme fatale is the flip of this utopian ideal, and in a real sense, is the non-white woman. In White Tears, Brown Scars, Black historian Deborah Gray White explains that the Jezebel archetype was constructed as the mirror opposite to the ideal Victorian-era lady of the house. The Jezebel is an archetype of sexualized service to the racialized codification of capitalism that we see in noir, as she is the binary inversion of the conceptually clean and chaste white woman. Her purpose is to destroy and recreate the universe through sexuality. Sexuality is how everything is created and how everything is destroyed. The archetype of the fatal femme is an offshoot from Vedic culture, demonstrated in Devi Ma Kali. Her power, like the deva of love, Kama, connects existence with non-existence. Through the power of sexuality, life is brought into the plane that we all share. And through this same power, life is transferred from one state to another. Sexuality is a form of death. The anxiety we feel within the walls of the noir universe are reflected in the beauty and venom of the fatal femme fetish, as she represents the power of nature, a phenomenon that is beyond the precognitive analytical limits of psychological projection, and beyond the futility of capitalism, as its libidinal drive attempts to usurp the base need we humans have for true, vulnerable connections with ourselves and with the universe as a whole. Fixated. Just coming over to eat your snacks.
She was conjured by the ancients, just wanted. They had a dead divination ceremony, and the devil was killed by the French. They wanted to hate the French.
Now they know that you're telling lies. You're telling me much, nothing but lies.
Pain flickering in patterns of open protocol portals, written standard starship cartographs.
To Satan. You would rather give credit to Satan than a group of African people who really put in the work and got rid of the French.
Afro-Orientalism is a signifying discourse on race, nation, and global politics, constituting a subtradition in indigenous U.S. writing on imperialism, colonialism, and the making of capitalist empire. It is grounded in several specific terrains: the experience of Black Americans and Asian Americans as indentured servants and slaves in the United States, the parallel routes of Western imperialism through Asia and Africa, the struggles of Black and Asian Americans to be understood as global citizens in a diasporic world, the constant self-awareness on the part of African Americans that Orientalism, through a racist discourse directed primarily against Asians, discriminates against people of color everywhere, the parallel byways that African Americans and Asian Americans, Africans and Asians, have traveled in the economic and political routes of modernity, the attempt by Black Americans from the origins of the Republic to link with larger radical and revolutionary projects originating outside the shores of the American Empire. Finally, in more recent years, the effort of scholars of African and Asian diaspora to speak of synchronous rather than discrete histories of Afro-Asian encounter and exchange.
The following is a conversation on race, sexuality, and capital that includes discussions of incest, rape, and sexual assault. Please be advised to take space for your mental care. In Kant, Capital, and the Prohibition of Incest, a polemic introduction to the configuration of philosophy in modernity, Nick Land disciples the exploitative culture of capitalist metropolis as accordant to South African apartheid and the world at large as a progenal projection of imperial patrilineal libido. He states, an Enlightenment society wants both to learn and to legislate for all time, to open itself to the other and to consolidate itself from within, to expand indefinitely whilst reproducing itself as the same. Its ultimate dream is to grow whilst remaining identical to what it was, to touch the other without vulnerability. The volatile mixture of hatred and desire that typifies an exploitative culture bears comparison with the psychology of rape. Joshua D. Gonsalves' essay, Reading Race and Rita and the Lady from Shanghai, Decrypting the Mogul, the Star, and the Auteur, argues that libidinal drive is the motivation for the director, the mogul, and the star. This drive germinates into fantasies, fetishes, and infatuations that hold the specified female, Rita Hayworth, captive in a state of object permanence, or in the terms of Homi K. Bhabha in his Of Mimicry in Man, as a paradoxical menace and resemblance to both her male auteur, ex-husband Orson Welles, and her male mogul, known sexual predator, Columbia executive Harry Cohen. Land's conclusion of capitalist exploitation as a typography of rape helps us better comprehend the handling Rita Hayworth received as described in Gonsalves. Cohen transformed Hayworth into a powerful musical diva as part of his strategic drive to maintain the A-level status of his company, Columbia Pictures. Cohen insisted on flattering her Spanish ethnicity by utilizing her Irish heritage. Hayworth reinvented her look through Irishness.
This was done by removing her hair on her forehead through a painful electrolysis process, in which each hair is plucked and the skin burns shut. Hayworth's sufferings under patriarchy began much earlier than Cohen. Her father trained her as both his dancing partner and incestuous object of sexual molestation. Our attention must be called to the abuse at the roots of this glamorous star's incrimination into the Hollywood industry. In incest lies the deliberate attempt to eradicate or compromise the separate identity of another person. The result is a sacrifice of the individual with their souls in bondage to someone else. It is this that Leonard Shengold, MD, calls soul murder, and the impact is tremendous.
In my life, and I would have if I hadn't been.
What would you have done had you not fallen in love with her?
I don't know, but something that didn't take so much time.
I'd like to reimagine the libidinal dynamic of capitalist extrapolation through the pure emanations of the star as kinetic presence. The star simply exists until her energy is recycled again. And through this, the titillation of phallic logic cannot define her in its defilement of nature. The star conceives of the limit cognition denoted through the behavior of the master as a culmination of the human soul death, being that which conceals itself through civilization, chivalry, or other forms of gentility in imposed imperial warfare.
We've engaged in a long, drawn-out entanglement of race, capitalism, gender, and sexual violence. Now that we've exhausted our disgust and distrust of psychoanalytic projection and male authoritative hegemony, let's see if we can put an end to this discursively disastrous story.
The wave function of sexualized capital collapses as we awaken from the bondage of our infatuated projection fetishes, as we slide into our pure emanation of source energy, gathered from a universal well of collective consciousness, derived in variant multitudes of fallible and fragile life forms, constellations whose strength and glow defies visible representation and emits an infinite life force flow. Over our exploration, we've come to see that the fatal femme fetish is an advocation for whiteness through the terrain of black film. We have realized our relation to cartographies of trauma through our meditation on delicate legacies. These media legacies reveal our refracted guises as allegorical relations to symbol emplacements within our screens and our senses. Our study has situated us within the depths of collective consciousness as a human subsect of all of creation. Thank you for your participation.
Silk fabric of your senses that with stagnant spurs its outfit as water carries out its compass. Our express bodies start at the bottom, lilies bounded, pounded to burnishing muck. Spines scurry upwards, grounding, plunge, pleasure deeper into self-worth. Show me you, flower gorgeous, choice to open your bottle, starting point for further revelation.